Hello, everybody. Hello. Thank you for joining us for High Score Game Audio Conference for 2025. And in particular, thank you for joining us for From Freelancer to Founder, Building Your Game Audio Practice. So just some quick housekeeping before we get into it. We are, this will be a panel discussion and we would love to have your questions. We will be using Slido, and I'm sure that by this point of the conference, you've all been familiarized with Slido, and also for those on the live stream, you should also have the Q&A, so please do send them through. The QR code will be on the screen for the entirety of the talk, so don't feel like you missed out if you want to jump in, at any point. Also, similar to what Rad said this morning, if there is a question in there that is very similar to what you would like to ask, do preference the upvote, because it is a lot easier to kind of see that, and then we know we're asking the questions that, most people would like to hear, which is always good. So yes, thank you for joining us. We'll get into it. So my name's Amy McNichol. I am the curator of High Score, and I also have worked at previously at game studio Lumi Interactive as their chief of staff and audio designer. And I've got my own composition, sound design practice on the side as well. And I will throw over to our guests to introduce themselves, and then we can find out about all, the wonderful world of business administration, tax, legal contracts, and everything like that I know you guys, that's the real work. You try to get the music out of the way so you can get to, your company returns. So, but I'll throw over to you, Matt.
Cool. Hopefully it won't be too dry. We'll try to spice it up a bit and not incriminate ourselves too much. I'm Matt Schenkel. I'm one half of Sub-Zero Sound. We're like a Melbourne-based game audio studio working in games, animation, all sorts of things. We've been around for like 10-ish years now, but only recently got incorporated, so learned a lot along the way with a lot of help from these two.
Hi, I'm Erin. I work at a firm called LDB. We are accountants and advisors. I've been working with many game developers in many different areas over the last probably 5 years, I would say. I've been an accountant for longer than that, unfortunately. But we obviously have a lot of experience with this entire process, from starting off absolutely green right through to, incorporating and then a full business exit at the total other end. So a lot of experience there to hopefully build on for you guys today.
It's always nice to get the creative rubbish out of the way so you can get to the real business. My name's Cam. I work at Cam Rogers Legal, which is a firm I started, obviously. I've been working in games for about 13, 14 years now, and we're digital entertainment lawyers, and we work with lots of video game developers, film producers, animators, and we assist people like yourselves go through this process that we're going to talk about today. So looking forward to getting into some of the issues and sharing some insights.
Yeah, thank you so much. So to kind of get it started, I feel like the title says it all, from freelance to founder. So a lot of you have probably been working in industry, whether it's game development, maybe you've come over from film, maybe you're also just starting out, but you're really getting in early, trying to, figure out what your career progression might look like. But I think that there's just a lot of nitty-gritty details that sometimes you're not quite sure who to ask, or if it's even something that you want to do. And so, we're trying to get to, I suppose, like have a broad overview of all of that today, what it's like to incorporate, the things that you have to consider, the right people to talk to, and also whether it's right for you, because it might not be. So I might just jump into our first question though, and this is for you, Matt. As you said, Sub-Zero Sound has been around for about a decade now. Congratulations. But incorporated just within the last 2 years. So I was curious, how did you know that you were ready to incorporate, and what was kind of the catalyst for that?
It was a very scary letter from the ATO.
Is there a non-scary letter from the ATO?
Sometimes, I promise, sometimes.
Okay, we'll get to that one soon.
Yeah, we were set up as a partnership since 2016, which I guess is just like a sole trader for two people. And we were, I mean, not making much money at all, but yeah, we got the letter saying, hey, you have this many years worth of tax to submit, and it was just all of them. So I think we just developed a desire to do things correctly and not go to jail, as all game devs do.
And you're still here with us, so you're not out on like good behavior or anything.
I'm actually here. I'm here on probation.
Yeah.
But yeah, as we were working on bigger and bigger projects, you know, like I reached out to Cam and the team at LDB and asked, like, you know, what are the benefits of, you know, going from a partnership to an entity, and yeah, there were some pretty good advantages. I think, you know, I saw the pathway and it sort of seemed like a necessary thing for us to do to scale up. And I think another catalyst for it was, and I think I said this in my panel last year, like my partner and I were trying to buy a house, and the way Sub-Zero was set up, the bank just didn't want to know about it. So yeah.
Like, you're not a real business, you just get money sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes it's a random amount. It just comes from another bank account offshore. So yeah, there was some incentives to start doing things right, and you know, better late than never.
Had you thought about it at all before the scary ATO letter? Like, was it something that you'd considered or discussed with other people in industry, but just kind of hadn't gotten around to? Or was it something that you just, you know, wasn't on your mind at all?
Yeah, it wasn't really on our mind. You know, we're just keeping ourselves busy with the work, the fun stuff, sort of tackling problems as they come along, and that's just been how we've been ticking along for 10 years. And yeah, I think good intentions, might be what save us.
I think good intentions plus a good accounts and legal team is what saves us. Yeah.
Yes.
We've got our first audience question, and thank you for this because I shouldn't assume. The question is, and I might angle this at you, Erin, what does it mean to be incorporated? Yes.
I absolutely actually had that thought. I was like, oh, that seems the definition. Okay, so when people reference the word incorporation, what they're generally referring to is when you move yourself from being a freelancer or operating as a sole trader into a company structure. So a company, a corporate, those words are used fairly interchangeably, but the concept is the same, where you move to an entity that is a legal entity in its own right. So it's almost like treating it like another person that you're working with. So it's its own company over here, and you end up being your own person over here. And it can get really confusing as you start to understand the difference, and people do blur the lines, and that's where they can get really caught up. But we always just say that when you set up a company and you become a company, you've got to think of it like it's its own beast, and it runs itself. It does all of these things, and whatever you're sort of doing on the side can be viewed separately, and sometimes should be. So it will have its own tax returns, for example. Whereas you would probably be familiar now at the moment, if you're still in the freelancer stage, that your tax return is you. You are the person, you lodge a tax return, it's got your income. When you incorporate, you take all of that trade that is in your personal name and you end up putting it in this company structure. It lodges the tax returns, it lodges GST if you're in that world, and it becomes the entity that you make your agreements with, your relationships with, in terms of the work that you then do. Does that clarify?
Yeah, no, that was great. I think also we'll kind of jump into this a little bit later, but what you were talking about, that separation between, you know, you as a sole trader, which is also like, you know, for example, if you're a sole trader and you're doing, you know, a casual job on the side, and you've got your ABN and they pay you, you know, the people that you've been contracted to will pay you through that, but you've also got a part-time or sometimes full-time job. It's like all of that income goes into your personal tax return. So I think that we'll definitely get to it at the end, where those things, the more successful you become at your, you know, music, sound design, audio, games, creative career, it's like, you know, if you then start getting grants, it's like you might get a grant, but all of that money isn't for you, it's to pay other people. But if you're a sole trader, etc., we'll get to that because it does overcomplicate things sometimes. So I think that this probably was a good lead into what are the actual steps, and also from my experience over chatting with people who have gone through this, even chatting to at Lumi Interactive, chatting with Christina and Lauren, our founders, about how they went through it at the beginning. I found that people don't know when to get a lawyer versus when to get an accountant, what the difference is. So maybe it would be good to understand between Cam and Erin, what are the actual steps to incorporate, and what is the difference between the two roles?
Yeah, I'll jump in here. I mean, the other thing before we get into that, I'd just like to say there's the legal reasons are slightly different for setting up a company than they are for the accountant. So from a legal perspective, it's really a question of risk. So there's nothing wrong with being a sole trader and having an ABN and entering into contracts and assigning rights and licensing rights and doing all that stuff that sound designers and composers you do. But of course, if you keep entering into contracts under your own name, that exposes you personally to risk. Whereas if you set up a company, it's the proprietary limited company that's entering into the arrangement. The company can get sued, and you as the shareholder, even if it's just you or if it's a group of people, are safe. And this is what we talk about when we refer to the corporate veil. So it's kind of twofold, the benefit. There's the accounting and the tax piece, which is critical, but there's also the protection piece for you as an individual behind that corporate veil, which is another critical reason why people set up companies. But to answer your question, Amy, about who comes first, I mean, this happens all the time. I tend to say go to the accountant first if you're considering incorporating. And the reason for that is that there's often a lot of tax questions that come first about the personal circumstance of the shareholders, whether they got trusts or how that all kind of looks. And then once the accountants have done their thing, then you come over and speak to the lawyers, and we set you up with shareholders agreements and stuff like that. Would you agree with that, Erin?
Yeah, absolutely would agree with that. It's almost like once you choose to incorporate, you have to do that step first before you can have any of the agreements that Cam's just referred to. So in terms of the actual steps, the administration itself is actually quite quick and it's quite easy. Requires a little bit of dollars, but generally it can be a quick process. So if you did find yourself in a position where you'd landed a contract with someone and they'd said, oh no, but we only want to engage with a corporate or with a company structure, then you can reach out to us and we actually can do that really quickly so that you've got that structure set in place. What we can't do super quickly and what we actually can't do at all is any of the agreements that comes with how you make that operate, any shareholders agreements, any IP related things. We will defer that straight to Cam, but you'll need the structure itself before you can have those conversations. That being said, because we worked really closely, we'll just bump to each other when is necessary. So if, at the end of this talk you think I need to speak to someone but I'm still not clear, you speak to one, you end up with both.
2 for 1 deal.
Sorry.
No, that is a good point. You do need both, but I've definitely heard people, go like, oh, okay, cool. I want to set up a company, so I need to, get a lawyer before I then get all the money in charge. But it is kind of like a combined process. You do need both. But something that I think most people do find, I suppose, a bit surprising, or at least anecdotally, that I've heard is that it's like you do need to have all those tax questions, because also sometimes you'll have all those questions answered and it might actually not be appropriate. So it's like, good to have that conversation first.
Yeah, I would just tack on to that just in a general experience in my accounting career, we definitely do get the comment of, oh, I spoke to my friend and my friend said this. And whilst I will always advocate for doing your research and understanding, but everybody's personal circumstances is different. So a recommendation that we might have for person A may not be applicable in the slightest for person B. So, whilst you can say, oh, this person incorporated at 8 years down the track, I'll just do that, that may not be right. So it's definitely, and no conversation is too early. I think I would probably preface that too. If you're just unsure and you just want to have like a quick powwow to see where you're at, there is value in that too, because it sets you up for the course that you're going to take for the next few years. And the answer might be, I don't think you're ready. And the answer might be, this is a great time. It's sort of up to you.
I was also just going to, oh, sorry, Matt. Did
I was going to say, I think Cam and Erin can both agree I'm a serial botherer.
He's an expert.
It's totally fine.
I mean, but, like any question I have about, like when to do something, what the benefits of doing something, they're pretty easy to get in touch with and, help answer those questions or, get me off the wrong track before, it's too late.
Yeah, I will say that asking early is always better than asking later. We do unfortunately get people who come to us and say, oh, I talked to someone and I did this, and we're thinking, why? So serial pest, absolutely acceptable. Actually a preference, because the more you ask, the more you learn, the more you're going to make the right choice for how your career is going, rather than, potentially chasing your tail, like your 8 tax returns that you had outstanding.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. And I think as well, given what you're sort of deal in being intellectual property, having that structure in place that works effectively so that you can appropriately license to the people that you're working with or assign those rights. If you can make a mistake in those areas, you can have a company that doesn't technically own the rights and you enter into contracts and you can really trip yourself up in a number of ways. So it's always best to have these conversations up front so you can get that kind of ironed out in advance and put your best foot forward when you're dealing with third parties.
We've got a question here that I think that there's kind of 2 parts to it. The first part is, are there any prerequisites for incorporation? Because I feel like there's probably a few things to consider, but it's always, as you've just said, have the conversations early. It might be different for your situation comparative to someone else. But the second part of that question is, at what point is this decided, company size, income, etc.? Because I'm also curious about, you can incorporate and be a company of one. And so it's not that you have to wait for, you've got 3 people together, you want to, go for it. So I guess are there any prerequisites that should kind of just be considered, or if you haven't had the conversation yet, is there any kind of, if you're at this point, you should definitely come in and chat to us. And then also, at what point is it decided, or what's the difference, I guess, if you're a sole trader versus a sole founder? What are the differences and benefits there?
I'll jump in. So, look, from my perspective, if there's a group of you that are working on one project, so if you're collectively providing services to a third-party company on one game, if you're not set up as a company, be you a partnership or 3 or 4 sole traders, each of you owns the copyright that you have created. So each of you would need to sign over or license that IP across to the company that you're working with, which means 4 or 5 signatures at a time. So I think that's a position of kind of risk, and I'd be looking to shore that up by setting up a company, because as Erin was saying at the beginning of this conversation, a company is essentially a person in the eyes of the law, which means it can own things, it can enter into contracts, which then means that the company can own the IP that you 4 or 3 people have collectively created, and the company enters into the contract with the game dev studio or whomever it is. So I think it sort of starts to become more risky and more relevant when there's more people contributing. If you're a sole trader and it's really just you can set up a company, as Amy said, and you can own all of the shares, and that de-risks it from your perspective. But if there's multiple people working on one project, delivering something that's ostensibly one product, I think that's a point that you should consider incorporation.
I think that was something that was quite relevant for us. We were getting to a point where we were wanting to collaborate with other, sound designers, musicians in the industry on our projects, and it was just, so much cleaner and easier to do it as all contributing to the work of this, entity, rather than, just another, signature on the page, as you said.
So from a, I guess, tax and accounting perspective, there's probably 2 things that I would say that are the most common. And I think we are going to touch on it a little bit later, but there is sometimes, in terms of prerequisites, some grants that you might apply for may actually just require a corporate. No rhyme or reason necessarily,
Happy for you to go straight into that if you would like, because I'm probably going to start on grants next. It's quite popular on the site.
Okay, all right. I'll answer the first bit and then I'll circle back. Okay. So yes, that's one. The other consideration for us is, well, it's probably two. So now there's three. Is asset protection. So in a similar vein to what Cam was saying, we would often recommend that if you are starting to get to a point where your IP is probably valuable, or in a position whereby that IP could foreseeably be sold to somebody else, or something might happen to it in the future, a corporate structure might be a better structure for you. So it's we will always consider, well, what is the intention of what you're doing? What stage are you at? And what kind of protection of that asset do you want? That can be in correlation to your personal affairs as well. So again, kind of on the risk piece, if you are somebody who, you're looking, like was mentioned before, looking to buy a house, you might want, you might know that having debt has risk on that side. So you might want to have your IP in a company on this side, so the risks are kind of separated and there's no crossover. The other thing that ends up being a main consideration does become income, just in a general sense. So as you can hopefully appreciate with doing your tax returns, the more income you have, the more tax you pay. Yay, we love it. Just is what it is. But what we can do is structure you in a way that we can have it as advantageous as appropriate within the system. So as a really simple guide, a company running a business like most of you would if you were in a company would have a flat tax rate of 25%. If I put a similar amount of income through you personally, you can go from anywhere from potentially 0, but 19% right through to 45%. So it can make a significant difference in terms of how much tax you are paying, and therefore how much cash is left over for you to, do what you love, which is actually doing the work itself. Grants. Yes.
I was going to say, just quickly, sorry, I'm changing my mind.
Okay, cool.
Because the second thing that you talked about, the IP and if you're going to have, or if you can kind of foresee that the IP that you're creating is valuable and maybe it's something that you'll be able to sell later, or, it's like you want to be able to de-risk that. I also kind of just want to take 2 seconds because this will go into the grants thing, to kind of talk a little bit about I suppose, we're mostly audio people here, and there are small differences, I suppose, between conceptually between incorporating a game development studio versus for example, Sub-Zero Sound, which is more of, I say, an audio house. Because, for example, if you make an amazing game as a developer, as a sole trader, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is my understanding. So if you make an amazing game as a sole trader and then that IP sells really well, but then you want to incorporate, do you have to basically pay to get that IP transferred? And that can be quite expensive. So I suppose, what is the difference if, and maybe Matt, you've had some experience with this, the IP for if you were to incorporate as an audio house or a composition house versus we've made a really great game as a sole trader team, because I feel like it is a little bit different.
So the way I would look at that is, if you're building a business, your business is still almost like your IP, but you would sell it as a whole house, as you kind of said. So you might work for 10 years and build up this brand that is we know that when we go to Sub-Zero, they're absolutely going to nail it. They give us exactly what we want. And so people know that business has value. So then at a point where, and look, obviously any stage of your life, but I'll just go with retirement as an example. As you come to that part of your life, you might be well, I don't necessarily want to do this anymore, but your brand has value and your business has value. So you want it in a structure where you can sell that to somebody else as well and say, well, they're going to continue on my legacy, but I'm going to step away. You can't step away from yourself. So when you're a sole trader, you just cease what you're doing. Whereas if you've got it structured as a business in a corporate, you have the ability to sell it to someone else who continues it on and also realise your like its worth, which is your worth, but its worth to somebody else to crystallize, hopefully, you know, some profits for you to then take on the next journey in your career or retire. One of the two. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with that. And I think the other thing too is there's obviously a difference between a game dev studio and the asset that it owns being a game, which brings together a range of different intellectual properties, be it art, design, code, including music and things like that, versus a sound designer or a composer that's providing one particular aspect of what's going on within the game. But the principles from an intellectual property perspective are kind of similar, because if you enter into an agreement with a game development studio, they're going to be expecting you to make warranties around what it is that you own and control. They're going to expect that you have created it and you haven't used AI. In the example of somebody working with Screen Australia, for example, there's an expectation that people are based in Australia. So there's a range of kind of warranties, we call, which is really just a type of promise that the company would be making, which is analogous to the types of issues that game dev studios face themselves. So it's important to get your house in order so that what you're providing further upstream to the game dev studio doesn't come riddled with problems and errors.
I think we can get onto grants now. I feel like we've got the foundations there. The first question that we've had come in about grants, and I think probably is the right place to start. If you get a grant, is that treated as income? And if so, is that a good reason to incorporate a small indie team?
Yes. I'll preface that with grants obviously have a significant range of how much you would get. So there is different considerations depending on how much you get. But generally speaking, they are all taxable, and they're taxable in the entity that they are contracted into. So back to my example earlier, if it's contracted into a company, it would pay, that's its income. It would then pay appropriate taxes on it. Whereas if it was in your personal name, it's your income, you would then pay personal tax on that. But the bigger the grant gets, you end up being in a position whereby you have potentially got a lot of cash up front and you haven't necessarily used it. And the consideration there is, without being super boring, is that when you're an individual or a sole trader, you report on what's called a cash basis. So every cash dollar comes in, every cash dollar goes out. That's how you report. So if you think about that, let's say you got a grant for 100 grand, but you didn't spend 100 grand on all of the rest of the things. It's cash, so you've made profit. You might not over the course of 3 years, but in the year in which you got it, you made profit. So then you end up weirdly paying tax on a profit that you're kind of not really going to have, because come year 2 and 3, you are going to expend that money because that's the purpose of the grant. What you can do in a company structure under that model is you can actually defer some of that income. So we have a lot of companies that are small, either small businesses or small game dev, but either way, where they have got money in by way of a grant, and we've essentially matched it to their expenses, because we know that you're spending it to achieve a goal, and you can do it on an accrual system. So as long as the agreement that you have makes it allowable, that is something we'll always look into, and it can be a really big benefit, because if you go back to the intention of a grant, generally it's so that you can do what you wanted to do with that money. And what you didn't want to do was to pay the tax man. So, yeah, that's my thoughts.
I was going to say, sorry, Cam, just before you jump in on that you get like a lump sum, but it doesn't get spent, because that can also include a lot of the grants that I think people will be applying for here, especially within game development. If you're working on a team, and most of the screen agencies, if we're talking about the screen agencies, they want a team. They want to employ people. They want to have job outcomes. So some of those line items aren't even for you, and they're not for resources. They're not for things that kind of directly, I suppose, like go to you as profit or like, you know, income that you spend. It's income that the ATO recognizes. But so essentially, if you had, for example, say that you'd applied for a grant and you had a line item for the amount of money that, you know, the person applying would get paid, but then also like another contractor would get paid. If you're a sole trader, you're getting personally taxed on the amount that you've assigned to pay somebody else. Is that correct?
No, not quite.
No, okay.
So you still, in the same way that a company would operate, the money comes in. So let's say you get like 100 grand, then you spend. So you'll either spend on yourself if you've remunerated yourself, or you'll spend on other contractors, other product, you know, things that you need to do the work. The difference at the bottom, so essentially the profit, that's what you get. That's what you get taxed on. That is the same across all structures. That's just a profit and loss system. That is the same across everything. It's what happens from there that is where the significant difference arises. And what I sort of just meant before was that it's more when you don't expend what you've been given that you can have some hurdles with how much tax you might have to pay.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that as well, that if you are applying to Screen Australia, they only deal with individuals or companies typically. They don't like to deal with partnerships for intellectual property reasons. It's just a very volatile way for IP to be managed, so it should be either locked up in a company or owned by an individual. The other thing I would say, it's fine to apply as an individual, and when you get the nod and you're successful, you can incorporate. What you can't do is use the grant money to pay for the establishment of your company, because that money is for game development. It's not for the acquisition of underlying rights in the form of IP or for setting yourself up on a corporate basis. So the timing works, but make sure you don't actually say that that's what you're spending the money on, because it's against terms of trade.
I think that might be a good segue into there's a question here that says, I think what stops developers from reaching out earlier to, you know, accountants, lawyers, etc., is not understanding how expensive it can be, and we often have limited income and resources. I'm sure there's an element to this question that is, it depends, but they want to know, can we demystify some of those early costs? And so I'm kind of curious from the perspective of both, like, you know, Erin and Cam, but also Matt, maybe your experience of, like, you know, was that a hurdle for you, or how did you kind of go about, I suppose, like inquiring and making sure that this was something that you could, I don't know, I suppose, like reasonably do and everything?
Yeah, like I think for us, like we had been established for quite a while, and we had been, you know, operating for quite a while before we got set up as an entity. Yeah, it did cost something. I can't remember what it was, but yeah, we had it, like, you know, we'd been working for quite a while. I think if you were starting up from scratch, you know, you'd obviously have to be putting your own personal money into it. But yeah.
Yeah, so from the incorporation side of things, there's sort of two types of costs you're going to have. So you'll have the actual cost in getting the company set up, and by that I mean the cost to get a constitution, which is what governs how the company operates, to register with ASIC, which is a requirement for every company structure that exists. And so that cost is kind of fixed. It is what it is. Doesn't matter if you did it yourself, please don't do it yourself, or did it through us. Unfortunately, I have had times where I've had clients who said, yeah, I set up a company, and we've had to then fix it. So, you know, sometimes being able to do things yourself is not always the right move. Our fees, I guess, is more, as Amy said, it is dependent. But we work with a lot of, I guess, freelancers and upcoming starters who we know there's not always cash there, and we understand that model. So we're not in it to be like, well, we're just going to like gouge you for all that you have. That's not what we're here for. Part of what we do is to go with you on the journey. So we will do our best to be really transparent with the cost and to potentially spread it out if that's what you need. But most, I would say, people in the early stages, it will be some of your own funding that you will need. And look, sometimes you might only need like an hour of my time to do it. But if you have a lot of questions or you are trying to do something that's a little bit more complicated, then it might need more time, which obviously means more cost. But I think you've got to put it down to, you know, what is the value in it for me when these are the things I want to achieve? Because if you want to achieve these things, you have to have this stuff. It's kind of like if you want to run a marathon, you got to buy good shoes. Sounds weird, but it is what it is. Like, you have to have those foundations set up. And if it means it costs you, you know, $2,000, but your structure is mint for the next, 10 years, it's a worthy investment. And whilst it feels a bit ouchy at the time, it's still going to put you in good stead.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think particularly from the accounting perspective, it's very difficult to put the genie back in the bottle. So, we've worked on some projects, which I won't name in particular, but the value of the IP goes up quite quickly because the game does well. There's no corporate structure that underpins it. You can't just set one up and move the rights across because the ATO goes, well, you're doing that as a tax dodge. So you've got to set yourself up for success. So doing that at the outset really does save a lot of heartache down the track too. And in terms of how I operate, we do a lot of work with the agencies and tend to set package deals in relation to that, which covers off all calls, emails, drafts of documents, whatever's necessary. So that's the way that we work. Got a pretty open door. I'll take calls from anybody and have conversations with people about whatever they're dealing with. It's one of the benefits of having your own practice. I can enjoy that type of work.
And the industry very much appreciates it, Cam. There's another question here about, is it beneficial for a freelancer to also get an accountant or a lawyer? And when is it worthwhile? Did you have an accountant and lawyer before you incorporated?
No. I just learned about this whole thing and emailed Cam asking, what should I be doing? And obviously recommended us to get in touch with Luke and Erin LDB, as well as explaining like the benefits of it as well. And I think at the time we were working on a pretty big project, which just launched as a Lego Party, and we were like, oh, that's a big scary brand. It'd be good to have a layer of separation between us and them, especially when we were knowingly using Duplo instead of Lego for the sound effects.
So it's worthwhile when you get a contract with Lego.
Yeah. It'd be coming for us.
I mean, as a general rule, I think it's you do realise this is being recorded, don't you? When you start dealing with third parties, that's when if you're developing your own kind of sounds and effects or projects at home, you're putting it on itch yourself or something, low risk. But if you're starting to work with Lego or other companies or other individuals, that's when you've got to start thinking about, all right, what are we doing here? How's the money flowing? What promises am I making to the other side? What am I delivering to them? How am I putting this stuff together, and what does it all look like? That's usually the catalyst I suggest speaking to a legal professional.
I feel like my answer is always it depends. And I think that's because there are so many stages that you start at. The reason I would recommend having an accountant from the early days, even just as a freelancer, is there might be things you just don't know. And you don't know what you don't know. So the way we might prepare your tax return and the questions we might ask you may actually open up a lot of other things that maybe you didn't think were even relevant. Okay? And then on top of that, if you end up having a corporate structure, if your accountant also is looking after you personally, they've got a really clear picture of what your sort of holistic business and finance looks like. So we can actually plan better for you, knowing your whole position. It's very hard to have a company over here and go, okay, well, we've got profits in here and maybe we want to do something. And we're like, whoa, I have no idea what that guy earns. That's really unhelpful. Like, what can we do when we don't know? So we will often say that whether you're just starting as a sole trader and you think you've got a very simple tax return, You might not, or you might be missing opportunities. So it is always worth having that conversation. And you know what? If you jump on the phone and you have a half an hour conversation and you think, yeah, I still don't think I need it, that's okay. But do that every year. Do that every couple of years so that you're constantly thinking about, well, when is this going to be the time? And you know what? They've actually said a few things where now it's becoming relevant and I think I should open this line of communication.
I'm kind of curious as well. Have there been times where people have come to you and, looking to incorporate, but it's actually been better to recommend staying as a sole trader? Because there was one question that was just kind of asking about the benefits of being a sole trader versus maybe incorporating. And again, I know that a lot of these answers are it depends. But yeah, I guess like the pros and cons of being a sole trader, I suppose, because there are still pros to it, and this is where those early conversations definitely help out.
Yeah, I mean, I think, first and foremost, obviously, being a sole trader, it's so simple. You just get an ABN and away you go. That from a intellectual property perspective, if you're creating all the materials that you're assigning to third parties, there's no documentation that's required with that. So it really does kind of keep costs down. It's just that as the business grows, it's not a very robust structure for managing revenue. It's not a very good structure for working and collaborating with other people. So it does sort of start to fall apart. But I wouldn't be afraid of kind of getting going with an ABN, doing things for yourself just to kind of get a sense of whether or not this was a project that was worth doing. Because as Erin was saying, it does incur hard costs. There's not much you can do about that when you go to incorporate.
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly with that. It is a simpler structure. It does come with less costs. It comes with less reporting as well. At the end of the day, you're still just one tax return, which might be easier to be more, bit more palatable. But there's nothing wrong with being a sole trader. So don't walk away from here thinking, oh, I couldn't possibly do that. I have to go straight to a corporate. That's not true. It's just about identifying when is the right time to move. And you might find that your personal circumstances or your family's circumstances mean that being a sole trader and just booking your income is the best option for you. Okay? And then maybe it's not. It depends. I need to find a new word.
I was just going to say, I think it's possible to do both. Like, you can have, your entity that you work for, as well as you can have an ABN that you do sole trading under. We've got both because we've done some projects that they haven't been able to contract a company. So we've had to run that through our sole trader ABNs. And I think that's like a big DGTO thing with the way, like whenever we've done some work with another service company. Yeah.
So the DGTO is the Digital Games Tax Offset. Just to have that acronym out there, but continue.
And yeah, the way that works, if a game studio is contracting like a service company, like an audio studio, to do their sound or something, for all that expenditure to be compliant with the DGTO, the offset, that company can't then subcontract further to another company. It has to be to natural persons or like sole traders. So yeah, we've had to do that when collaborating with some other studios, and that is something that our clients chase us up on, just to make sure all our subcontractors are Australian and people. Yeah.
Make sure they're real people. That actually, it's interesting because I was going to ask about the idea of like essentially like studio growth, or when you have to, you've got so much work coming in that you need to either hire somebody, contractor, part-time, maybe even like full-time to come on board. I'm curious about the the benefits of that. Obviously is incorporating, but just before we get into that, I think that you were just saying like those companies follow you up to make sure that all of those things are in check, because they obviously have to do all of the the returns and paperwork and legal. But I'm also kind of curious, like when you've incorporated and you have an accountant and a lawyer, those companies that hire you, they have accountants and lawyers. So do you get to just tell them to talk to your people and it's a bit easier now, or do you still kind of have to, I guess, like, have you found it easier to, I suppose, like negotiate or have those discussions now that you've got a team at your kind of disposal who know what you're kind of doing and where you want to go with your business?
It's like a Pokemon battle, just throwing our lawyers at each other. It's never really come up for us. We've never really had to, I mean, maybe because we don't do music through the company yet. I think that's where things probably get a bit curly. But yeah, in the way that all our sound contracts work, I think they're pretty simple, and we've never had to do anything complicated with contracts or getting our people to talk to their people, which are probably in some cases or many cases the same people.
Yeah, I mean, it is one of the benefits of having a lawyer, I guess, is that you can be nice and then you get the attack dogs out to have the real argument. I mean, the best way it works, I think, is that if you kind of settle on the commercial position and go, cool, this is how much we're getting paid, this is how many minutes of content, this is broadly where the rights position is at, and then the contract comes in. If the commercial points are settled, then my job becomes easier because all I'm negotiating is the legal stuff. But if I get involved and the commercial position isn't settled, the percentages are out, and I have to have that negotiation, it can really ramp things up. A lot of lawyers won't get into the commercial conversation because from a legal perspective, it can represent risk. I'm happy to do that because I've done a lot of it and I can tell whether or not these deals are good or bad. But the more work you can do up front and getting the commercial position settled will obviously save you legal costs. So that's one thing to keep in mind.
We do work definitely across like accounting firms, if that makes sense. So if, as Amy's example, if there was a query that came in and was like, we need this information, it would be absolutely reasonable for any of my clients to reach out to me and say, hey, blah, blah has requested this. Can you sort it out for me? Because not only is sometimes it's just easier, we might have that information on hand quite quickly, so it saves you time trying to find it in your emails or put it together in a spreadsheet or whatever you need to achieve. But also sometimes, and I feel like I say this to a lot of my clients and they do see the worth in it, is that finance and accounting is what we do. It's not what you do. What you do is something way more exciting, a lot more creative, and you actually don't need to burden yourself with the time that you are losing doing all of the admin stuff if you don't need to, because that is time that you can spend building, creating, networking, and doing those things that are actually going to further your business. So whilst I will always say you have to know what's going on and don't just say, oh, my accountant does it, that's not going to be good enough. But there is a sweet spot where you go, you know what, they've got a handle on it and I'm paying for that, but it's worthwhile because I have now got all of this time and opportunity to actually further my business. And I think that's a really important, going right back to when it was like, when is the time to get an accountant and a legal? Sometimes it's that point where you're like, I'm losing too much time and not achieving my goals because I've got these hurdles and somebody else can do those hurdles.
I think the sweet spot for us with that is when we started working with LDB. You ran us through Xero, the accounting software, and like on a day-to-day level, like, we do that, just, making sure that everything coming in is going to the right account and, whether it's tax-free or has tax. But then, I think you come in every quarter or at the end of every financial year and, just like do the thing that is complex and takes time and that I fortunately never have to think about. But on a day-to-day level, I do love poking around with that and seeing what's coming in, what's going out.
It's really important. Like, it really is extremely important that you know where you actually sit, because it is the people who are not aware or don't know how to get that information that might find themselves in a hole that they can't get out of. So the Xero example is the perfect example where we will, for anyone who doesn't know, do we know what Xero is? Okay, great, cool. We always give all of our new clients who are going on to Xero a 1-hour demo, and that is just to give you the tools to do it. okay? So that you across it every day, you know how to use it. And if someone says to you, hey, do we actually have enough money to do this? You can go, you know what? Yeah, we do. And I can see it because it's here and we're all reconciled and we're happy. Let's go spend it. Okay, but if you don't know that, then you're all of a sudden trying to build spreadsheets, going through your bank account, going, oh God, like, have I paid all my bills? Have I done all these things? So that becomes really crucial, because at the end of the day, I can always go through all your data and I will make it perfect. It's your business, okay? So I can't change the data. I can just make it helpful, look good, make you pay tax. It's my job.
I think as well, it's like sometimes these financial problems start to become legal problems. You know, if you've entered into a contract, you're delivering something, there's a DGTO application further up the food chain from you, and you can't verify your expenses, which then feeds into what you promised to the game dev studio you're working with, that becomes their financial problem, and then you've got a legal problem on your hands. So good accounting is best practice.
We've only got about like 10 minutes left, so I think I wanted to discuss a little bit about because you mentioned earlier, Matt, that you've got contractors on board, and when you do incorporate and you've got that extra work coming in, sometimes you do need help. And so I think I'm kind of curious about, like, when you're looking to formally employ somebody under an incorporation, what are the considerations and kind of like the obligations of that? Because I think that as creatives, we often work with people in both casual settings, but then also just like, kind of either sole trader agreements on deliverables, but, contracting and employment is very different. So I'm kind of curious about, like, what are those processes, considerations, and, how have you found it as well, Matt, going into that?
Yeah, we've been fortunately on both sides of that bit of paper. So when we were doing contracts as, sole traders helping out other studios, which we still do every now and then, just knowing like what, they earn, what we earn, what their client owns, all has to be spelt out pretty clearly. And it's usually pretty standard. Like for sound design, I think it's a bit less, as I said before, it's a bit less tricky than the music. We're not releasing sound asset packs on Bandcamp or Spotify or anything. I thought we could. But I think it's all been pretty neat, and I think we just use Cam has a template that we use.
I mean, sorry, just to jump in. I think traditionally independent contractors were seen as the kind of easier, more straightforward way of managing things. But in Australia, we've actually got quite a complex industrial relations matrix that is very difficult to navigate. And if you're working, just to illustrate, if you're working with a sole trader that is working ostensibly for their time on an hourly basis, for example, best practice would suggest that you have to pay superannuation, which is analogous to bring them on as an employee anyway. So I think a lot of these rules are starting to tighten. It used to be considered just much more straightforward to bring somebody on with an ABN, and it was clean and easy, but there are still some obligations that will persist, even if they're not considered employees. On the other hand, if you bring someone on as an employee, it is a larger administrative overhead. There's a range of things you've got to take into consideration, not least, their background, their experience, what award would apply. And all these things feed into it to figure out what the rate is that they'll be getting paid. But the upside is more control over what it is that they're doing. And secondly, the intellectual property and what they're creating is automatically owned and controlled by the employer. So that's the kind of key benefit from a legal perspective. But there's no free ride. Like, one way is slightly easier, but there are still obligations that will apply. And then the employment one is more robust. You get more control, but it is a higher administrative overhead.
I think for us, we are at the point where we're working with contractors more often than not at this point, and it's getting to the point where, we're considering, like, do we need to hire, like, our first, real hire aside from the co-founders? But it's always a big ask when and this is something that I was talking to Gordon about yesterday and sort of got from his talk, asking, people, sound designers in our network, like, hey, what are you doing right now? Can you help us out with a project that's been dropped on us? always feels terrible because that happens to us, and no matter what we've got going on, we'll always say yes because we want to do it. And yeah, it's would prefer to give people more heads up than we got ourselves when we were in the same position. But yeah, I think with contracting, that's just going to be a bit, it's always a bit more flexible. Whereas, I wouldn't want to hire someone and then suddenly have nothing for them and be like, hey, sorry, you gave up this other job for us. Goodbye.
Yeah, well, that's right. Because I think the other thing too is that, if you need to make somebody redundant, that can be quite an expensive process, and this is why a lot of companies find themselves in a kind of in a bit of a hot water because they don't realise how many weeks of pay they actually owe, and then all of a sudden it's like, wow, that's 4 employees
Also
by 5 weeks.
as well.
Yeah, annual leave. So it does sort of become expensive. The only other thing I would add just on the independent contractor thing is that these rules are changing internationally now. So it used to be the case that if you hired somebody overseas, cool, you could pay them by the hour, no problem. But what we're seeing now is that if somebody is considered an employee domestically, say you hire somebody in Canada, as an Australian company engaging them, you're obligated to honour the Canadian employment law benefits, which is pretty much impossible to navigate. So, yeah, these loopholes really are starting to close. Yeah.
So hire local is what you
Indeed.
I was just wanting to, for I guess like our final question is just what would be, I suppose, if somebody was looking to, take that next step, like, they've heard this talk, they've been considering it for a while, and they're like, actually, I think this is something that I want to do. Besides the, obviously come have a conversation, reach out to accountants, lawyers, and just start that process. What would be kind of, I suppose, like Matt, from your perspective, the one thing that you kind of wish that you either knew or had prepared, and then also from Erin and Cam, what would be the one tip that you would have for people kind of coming in to have conversations with yourself? So
I think I would have wanted just to do it earlier. It wasn't as hard as I thought, especially with these two. Also, like, it's not like we're still technically casual with Sub-Zero. Like, you don't have to make a huge change to how you work or operate. You can still do stuff in your time. So it could have done it earlier, and it wouldn't have really. It wouldn't have been the wrong time. I don't think we could have done it a year or two earlier.
I think that it is important to have a really clear goal, a clear idea of where you think you want to go or where you think you are going, because that really frames a lot of the conversations that you would have initially with probably both of us, to be honest. Because if you think you're going one way and it turns out you're actually going another one, then what we might recommend or the steps that we would take would change. So I think a really clear understanding of where you think you're going is probably a hot tip.
Yeah, I think plan for success. You look at teams like Team Cherry, for example, or House. If they delayed in setting up their incorporation with the products that they've released and the type of revenue that they've generated, that would be a big problem that they'd be managing. So get it done early and set yourself up.
excellent. Well, thank you so much, Matt, Erin, and Cam, and thank you everybody for attending. And if you want to have those conversations early, please do seek out one of these amazing 3 people. So thank you so much.